Welcome and thank you for joining. My name is Haley Soifer. I'm the CEO of the Jewish Democratic Council of America, and I want to thank you all for joining us for today's program, Black Lives Matter is a Jewish Value. Today's conversation comes at a critical moment in our country's history. We have all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of Black Americans, President Biden told us during his first joint address to Congress on Wednesday night. And enough is enough of the systemic racism that has plagued our country throughout our history. Our Jewish tradition teaches us that everyone is created equal, and the loss of even one life is as if one has destroyed an entire world. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Daunte Wright, the list goes on and on. Our tradition also teaches us that no matter how hard or how long it takes, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. We know that Black Lives Matter is a Jewish value, and that is why we've come together today. In just a minute, we will hear from members of the House Congressional Caucus on Black-Jewish relations and others to discuss the importance of our communities working together, the ramifications of last week's verdict in the George Floyd trial, and where we go from here. And I want to thank Representative Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, Brenda Lawrence, Lucy McBath, Colin Allred, Dean Phillips for joining us today, as well as JDCA board member Beth Kiefer-Leonard and JDCA Next Gen Council member Rabbi Adam Latz, both of whom are joining us from Minneapolis for being a part of today's discussion. There will also be an opportunity to ask questions of today's guests. So please write your questions in the chat and we will do our best to answer them. I'm now happy to turn it over to our first guest and moderator, JDCA Next Gen Council member and Minneapolis-based Shir Tikva Senior Rabbi, Michael Adam Latz. Over to you, Rabbi Latz.
Thank you, Haley. It's good to be together today. And before I begin, I just want to make note that on this day of Lag BaOmer, this day that should be a day of celebration and joy, we as a worldwide Jewish community are mourning the deaths of at least 45 people in northern Israel who died at a Lag BaOmer celebration last night. Their dancing turned to mourning. Our hearts are with them, Zichronam Livracha. Today is the day that we tell the story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son, Rabbi Elazar. Following the siege in Jerusalem about 2,000 years ago, the Roman authorities banned Jewish practice. But the monarchy heard that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was criticizing the government's policies. So they put a bounty on his head and he was exiled. He and his son escaped to a cave in the hills of northern Israel. And the Talmud taught that they would sit in their cave, they would pray and study Torah all day long. And they did this over and over again for 12 years. Well, after 12 years, the emperor died. Elijah the prophet came to let them know that they could leave the cave. And so they emerged. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai cried out in despair, the people have abandoned Torah study. They are simply laboring in the fields all day. And his eyes burned with such fury that everywhere he looked, people died and they collapsed to the ground. A voice from heaven cried out that this was not just and sent the rabbi and his son back to the cave to do tshuva, to repent for a year. And after the year was up, a divine voice called to them. They emerged from the cave. Rabbi Elazar still seethed with anger, but Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, well, his eyes offered healing to a broken world. Our rabbis emerged from isolation into a very imperfect world. They could not cope with the world's pain and imperfection. As we speak today of Black Lives Matter as a Jewish value, as we speak today of the trial of Derek Chauvin, the man who murdered our neighbor George Floyd, well, the tale of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Elazar is a vital one. Simply put, Jews do not escape the world. We Jews are in the world. We do not escape the suffering of the world. We rush toward it. As my beloved friend and colleague, Rabbi Shai Held teaches, faced with a situation that makes us stare the depth and the extent of our vulnerability in the face, most of us want to flee. Here then is Judaism's message. You want to serve God, run toward the very people and places you most want to run away from. You want to be religious, learn to be present for people when they are in pain. All the rest is commentary. I live 13 blocks where our neighbor George Floyd, Zichrono Livracha, was murdered. I've been to that square at 13th in Chicago literally more than 100 times in the past year. And perhaps one of the most important moments was last Tuesday night following the guilty verdict of the police officer who murdered Mr. Floyd, when thousands of people showed up in an interfaith vigil. In the place where last May, we witnessed the worst of humanity choke the life out of Mr. Floyd, Tuesday night we saw a glimpse of the best. A brilliant, multiracial, multi-faith, multi-generational sea of humanity, weeping and praying, praising and challenging, supporting and loving each other. Black and brown, native and immigrant, Asian, Latine, Muslim, Jewish, Sikh, Christian, Unitarian, Baha'i, and Buddhist, young and old, middle-aged, queer, those with disabilities, all present. We heard cries and songs and psalms and wailing. We recited the mourner's Kaddish for our dead. We stood in silent vigil for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. It's not enough. It will never be enough. Mr. Floyd should be reading stories to his daughter Gianna today, not being mourned. We look to the people on our panel today, our distinguished Congress people. It's a heartbreaking tragedy that Representative Macbeth's son, Jordan, is not here with us today. He should be. It's a grave injustice he is not. We should not have to mourn the lives of these people. Tuesday night, we came together because 12 people believed what they saw, that George Floyd's heart was not too big. Derek Chauvin's was too small. Amidst the headlines and the sound bites and the punditry, an extraordinary movement is being birthed today. Here in Minneapolis and in Brooklyn Center, where Dante Wright, Zichrono Livracha, was murdered by police a few weeks ago, people have come forth in exquisite mutual aid and communal support. There's stations set up on the streets with free clothing for those in need. The creation of public art, a memorial space, an artistic installation for all who have been killed by Minneapolis police, space for prayer and contemplation, meditation tents, doctors and nurses offering medical care, job coaches working with people to find employment. Last Wednesday night, 2 middle school students showed up with their laptops and signed up more than 70 people to get their COVID vaccines. There's prophetic activists of every age with bullhorns demanding the state re-envision public safety, address systemic racism and police violence, and discuss reparations. There's free food and water and diapers. It's a holy, glorious, vibrant, beautiful place of moral imagination and soul and tears and overwhelming grief and suffering and hope. I want us to reflect together today as a Jewish community and with our Black allies and beloveds in Congress, to reflect on this extraordinary story of human dignity and compassion and love. I want us to see what happens when we come out of the caves of our isolation to see one another's humanity. Like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, to work together, to write a new story together of compassion, justice, and love. We are joined today, my friends, by somebody who I admire really, really, really a lot, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman-Schultz. May not be the tallest member of Congress by any stretch, but I think she's one of the fiercest. And it is not every day when we see, well, let me rephrase this. A lot of people on the other side of the aisle profess their faith with platitudes. Representative Wasserman-Schultz leads with real Torah and real integrity. And I will take a person who lives their values but doesn't feel the need to preach them every second any day of the week. That's what we need more of in Congress. So Congressman Wasserman-Schultz, I know that Congressman Lawrence is supposed to be with us shortly, and hopefully she will be here. I understand the parking on Zoom is a little difficult these days, so we'll let her find her spot. But could you speak to us for a moment, Congresswoman, just about the impetus you had to help create this Black Jewish caucus in Congress, and what motivates you to do this work, and what progress are we making? And here is Congresswoman Lawrence. She got a prime parking spot. We are so glad you are here. And Congresswoman Lawrence, I'm Rabbi Michael Latz. I have the honor of moderating, and I'm tongue-tied because y'all are so amazing. And so I just asked Congresswoman Wasserman-Schultz if she would start by sharing with us about the creation of your caucus and a little bit about what motivates you. And we'd love to hear then from you as well, how you got involved and the work you're doing.
Thank you, of course, and Rabbi Latz, thank you so much for your really incredibly generous, kind words. And I do also want to add my own sadness and remorse for what happened with the horrific tragedy in Israel last night. This is just an incredibly somber day. And there are too many families in Israel that instead of celebrating are grieving, and our hearts really are with them. This is such an important discussion, and yet again, the Jewish Democratic Council of America is helping to lead the way. Rabbi, thank you very much for that really poignant and moving opening. And Haley, really, for the continued leadership that you have demonstrated over and over again as the full-time professional leader of this organization, and my dear friend, Congressman Ron Klein, who was the visionary that helped, along with so many of you, really bring it to fruition. So both of you and the entire team at the Jewish Democratic Council of America just do incredible work to organize our community and further our common goals, and make sure that there is a Jewish and democratic voice that is leading in this country. And we can see how important it is right now to have these discussions about the essential alliance between the Jewish and Black communities, because our history is intertwined. When Congresswoman Lawrence came to me on the House floor with the idea of forming a Black Jewish caucus, it was something that I immediately embraced, because our communities are bound by common experiences and shared values. And now more than ever, we have to draw on that history to help us move towards that more perfect union. Just let's go through some of what that history includes. The Jewish community helped found the NAACP and the National Urban League. Jewish lawyers helped the NAACP Legal Defense Fund win its long court battle against Jim Crow segregation. A Jewish man, this is a little known, as we start Jewish American Heritage Month tomorrow, it's important to note those legacies. A Jewish man wrote Strange Fruit, that iconic song about lynchings that the singer Billie Holiday made into a classic, which was a song that drew more attention to these murderous acts of terror taking place in the South than so many other things did. And Jewish activists, among many others, fought and died alongside civil rights activists in the 1960s. There are so many other historic moments of solidarity that I could cite. But while it's important for us to coalesce around fighting injustice here and around the globe, the theme of this program, I truly believe the idea that Black Lives Matter is a Jewish value is so critical for us to convey, because fighting oppression in all of its forms is a Jewish value. People across all demographics should embrace Black Lives Matter, because it should not be the burden of a specific group or community to fight for this basic recognition of a people's humanity. That's why we came together in Congress as Blacks and Jews, because we are stronger when we are united. And as Jews, we live with not only the rising tide of modern anti-Semitism, but with historic trauma that passes through stories from generation to generation, lador vador. And we know firsthand the perils of inaction in the face of discrimination, hate, abuse, violence. That shared trauma, as well as the pride that we take in the resilience of our community, has really helped shape modern Jewish identity. I mean, most of us on this call, we didn't spend our formative years during World War II. We weren't immersed in the Holocaust era, but it has been passed down, that shared trauma, because we have made it an imperative to make sure that people never forget, so that it happens never again. This is a unique juxtaposition of why I live my life through a commitment to Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. And that drive to improve the world one life at a time is what led me to become a public servant. I joke often, some of you have heard me say it, that I made Tikkun Olam a career choice. I took it so seriously. I mean, for me, I was elected as the first Jewish woman to represent Florida in Congress. When I make policy decisions, I do so through a distinctly Jewish lens. And even though the bigotry we face has taken on many new forms, I know, as we all do, it will take a monumental effort to continue fighting for progress. And our only path forward is together, two communities remaining intertwined. We had neo-Nazis storm through Charlottesville carrying tiki torches and spewing racist and anti-Semitic bile. We all felt that from afar. You don't have to go back to 2017 to know that a few months ago, when those racists and anti-Semites stormed the Capitol on January 6th, they were hell-bent on causing destruction, violence, and murder. And they were racists and anti-Semites. That they wanted to make sure that the members of Congress on this call and the entire world saw their hatred up close and personal. And as we have done time and again, Black and Jewish communities came together to speak out and stand up against that hate. In Charleston, Pittsburgh, and countless times over the past year, racism and anti-Semitism have been on the rise, and our communities have faced this explosion of bigotry and hate and come together. So it was natural that the leaders of our communities would come together. We have historic ties of fighting racism, oppression, and anti-Semitism together, and we need to strengthen those bonds. We have to remind all of America that the strength of this country lies in its diversity. We need to make sure that our children and our children's children know that we are natural allies. And that's why we started the Congressional Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations, its formal name. I'm very proud to be a founding co-chair along with my friend and colleague, Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence. This caucus has the same goal as today's discussion: to strengthen coalitions that can implement change together by building from our common struggles. And we need that now more than ever. Our communities must unite to confront that hatred, injustice, and inequality, because in unity, there is strength.
Thank you, Congressman Wasserman-Schultz, and Representative Congresswoman Lawrence. It's so wonderful to have you here today. I'm wondering if you could share both about your involvement in the Congressional Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations, and also share with us what Congress is working on toward addressing systemic racism that has plagued our country for 400 years, and it's past time we did something about it.
It's so past time. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here today. You know, there are times when you have to speak up, you have to organize, and you have to take some action. I was proud during, we're going now on our 2.5 years now, when we had the shootings in the synagogues, and we had the mass shootings, and we saw this just growing voice of racism and anti-Semitic groups growing in our country. I went to someone who was such a legend and such a mentor to me and to the world, and that was John Lewis. And I said, John, do we have a Black Jewish caucus? We have caucuses on everything you can think about in Congress. And he thought, he said, you know, Brenda, we don't, but we should. And he said, I said, would you join with me as a founder? He said, absolutely. And then we sat there and talked about the history and how the Black community and the Jewish community connects. You know, he loved to tell me the story about the Pettus Bridge. And when that historic walk happened, we were locked arm in arm with rabbis and with the Jewish community, being attorneys, walking with us in protest, losing their lives on the fight for justice and racial justice. And I also talked to Elsie Hastings, who had this amazing coalition of working together, the Black and Jewish members of Congress. And I went to him and he said, I never formed a caucus, but I always led in making sure that we stay connected, and he supported it. So we moved forward, and I wanted it to be bipartisan. That was very important to me because I didn't want politics to get in the middle of this, because racism, anti-Semitic, it does not, it's not based on race, it's based on ignorance and it's evil. And we had to lock arms to fight this together. We have joined together in supporting the anti-hate bill that you just saw, that were standing up against attacks on Asian Pacific Americans. We have stood up for the George Floyd bill that, you know, fights racism in America. And we also have stood up against the anti-Semitic policies and rules that we see trying to navigate its way into our economy and to our policy. I want you to know, everyone here listening, I'm always moved by the statement by Martin Luther King. It's not the evil that people do, it's the silence of the good people that creates the most harm. And so my objective is to get the good people together, to raise our voices and say we will not be silent during a time like this. And I want to say to everyone, as we go into Jewish Heritage Awareness, I'm looking forward to participating, as well as we have made a decision that Juneteenth, we will have a collaboration throughout all our districts to celebrate Juneteenth, as well. As you know, was the day that we finally acknowledged that slavery had ended in America. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. I have one question for the two of you, and then I'll pass it off to Congressman Wasserman-Schultz. First, today we now recognize that it's not only Blacks and Jews, but in fact, 20% of the Jewish community are people of color. So, so this is not just an issue we're working on for other folks. This impacts members of our own community, and I think that awareness is growing in our own community, thank God. Two, I'm getting some questions in the chat from people who are curious. It seems like the House has done a robust job of passing responsible, humane, decent legislation, and your counterparts across the Hill might need a little, as we might say in Yiddish, Congresswoman Lawrence, a little zets. I'm not exactly sure what they might say in the African-American church, but in Yiddish, this would be like a little kick in the tush.
Yeah.
What can we do, and what can you all do to help put some very loving pressure on your members of the Senate in order to take action on bills such as, example, the George Floyd Memorial Policing Act? What can you and what can we do to help them join all of you courageous leaders of conscience and being remembered, God willing, by their grandchildren for having stood up on the right side of history and not, well, as the great senator from Texas did the other night, feigned sleeping through President Biden's speech. So what would it take for us to help wake them up to do right by the American people and to do right by Mr. Floyd, by Congresswoman Bath's son, and by all of Americans who deserve to be treated with basic dignity and respect and to be able to breathe free?
Well, one thing I want to say that's exciting, I was reached out to the to our caucus, which has been limited to Congress, that the Black and Jewish members of the Senate wanted to expand the caucus to make it bicameral. And so they want to join. That's a great thing, because that gives us that inroad into the Senate to work together. The thing that, going back, if I could just repeat, when we are silent, when things are wrong, and my grandmother used to always say, if you're really telling the truth, it'll make people uncomfortable. It is very much needed that we confront the truth, that we use our voices and our power to shake the norm and to rattle the cage that no, it's not acceptable, and that you cannot sit in your seat of privilege and say, racism doesn't exist, or anti-Semitic. I've heard, everything from get over it. You Black people are too sensitive, and all the Jews are always crying about some situation, get over it. We have to be deliberate and be passing that legislation. Unlike when Donald Trump was there, when we passed legislation, it was never entertained in the Senate. They are actually negotiating the George Floyd Act. They actually passed the Anti-Hate Act. These are major steps that now, with a new administration and with, thank God, we have more of a balance in the Senate, that we can actually confront and make people realize and take a statement. When you take a vote, that's where you stand. And some people were comfortable never having to take a stand because they would never introduce the bill. So I feel that we're moving in the right direction, and I'm hopeful.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Lawrence. I'm gonna turn my moderator Keepa over to the very fierce Congresswoman Wasserman-Schultz, who is suggesting that perhaps some of the people on the other side of the hill need a little patch in the tuchus to get going. Our grandmothers of blessed memory were all the same. They would give us a little zets, Congresswoman Lawrence, and then feed us, right?
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of, carrot and stick. We've got a little patch in the tuchus and a little bit of matzo ball soup. So thank you so much for being here.
We call it tough love.
Yeah, there you go. Congresswoman Wasserman-Schultz, I hand the yad over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to my dear friend, Brenda Lawrence. Really, your leadership, your friendship, we are really true and dear friends, not just the political variety. And your vision in creating this and bringing our communities together in a formal way, even while the work continues informally, is so pivotal and so critical for us right now. So I just look forward to working side by side, fighting side by side, and marching side by side with you the whole rest of the way until we finally rid this country of injustice.
At minimum, create accountability, because in this George Floyd thing, if I could just say this, please. So many people were saying when the verdict came in for guilty that, we finally reached justice. No, we reached accountability. Justice would have been George Floyd being alive, taking another breath. But the accountability, it forces people to confront the reality. Some people do the right thing because it's right. Others do the right thing because they know they'll be held accountable if they don't.
Of course, absolutely. And that's the work that we're focused on right now. And I'm hopeful that our colleagues that are negotiating the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act are going to be successful, and that we'll be able to bring this across the finish line. So thank you so much, Congresswoman Lawrence.
Thank you.
Now I'll turn to two colleagues that are also dear friends, and really we're going to be asking the same questions. Hello to Lucy and to Colin, two incredible leaders in their own right. Colin is actually an elected member of the leadership. He holds the leadership position in our caucus of representing the members who have served in Congress 5 terms or less. Was just reelected to his 2nd term and flipped a Republican district when he won in 2018, and has really hit the ground running ever since. And Lucy McBath has absolutely done a remarkable job prior to her service in Congress when she turned her pain into purpose. The loss of her son, Jordan, was, I know, devastating. I've had the chance to hear her and talk with her about her experience. And so coming together today and being able to chat to have me moderate this panel and have you hear from them is such a privilege. So my friends, the question I have for you on behalf of the JDCA is, why are both of you members of the House Congressional Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations? Why was that so important to you? And what is being done in Congress right now to address the issue of systemic racism that's plaguing our country?
Yeah, I don't know. I always defer to Lucy because I think she's the best. But we can tag team. And I'll just say that I agree with you, Debbie. Lucy is an inspiration to all of us. She's one of my dear friends. I haven't been able to see her as much lately because I've been on paternity leave, as some of you know. And Lucy, it's good to see you. And you know, thank you for all of your leadership. So, you know, I can't think of a better time to be a member of this caucus. The threat of kind of, you know, the white supremacist ideology that we've seen, you know, bubble up across our society, I think is one that has never been more present in my adult lifetime, and one that is, you know, equally threatening and dangerous for African Americans and for Jewish Americans. And I think we have a long history. I'm a civil rights lawyer. I'm a student of the civil rights movement. We have a long history of, you know, Black, Jewish, you know, working together and solidarity to move forward on civil rights in a way that I think, you know, whether you're talking about, you know, what happened in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and the killings of the activists down there trying to register voters, or lawyers in the courtroom who you know, fought for Brown v. Board and other important civil rights rulings that had Jewish lawyers working with Black lawyers as part of that, to what we're seeing now, you know, with the white supremacist movement in our country, one that is, you know, attacking synagogues, that is using this ideology to commit violence across the country. This is the time for us to lock arms and to say that we're all in this together. I think, of course, I love to quote the great John Lewis, who would say that we might have come here on different ships, but we're in the same boat now, and we all need to be pulling in the same direction. And we have a shared experience that I think is unique in the United States, and one that we need to leverage both that history and our shared experience to get some things done.
Thank you so much. Lucy?
Well, you know, I'm not an attorney or any of those things, but I grew up in the civil rights movement. You know, when I was a child, I was right in the marches and all the rallies in Chicago, Illinois, right next to my family, fighting for equality and justice. And so, you know, I kind of always joke and say one of the first songs I ever learned to sing, truly, probably is the truth, is "We Shall Overcome," because we were always singing it. So I have those very fond memories of working on behalf of civil and human rights for all people, particular people of color. And I remember so very vividly the Jewish community marching right alongside us. And so, you know, I joined our caucus, and I think it's important for us. It's a bipartisan caucus, and it shares the powerful ability for us to bring out about awareness and bring about change, which is so sorely needed right now across the country. And our caucus is a way for us to just make sure that we are doing the work of bringing stability and a sense of humanity and reconciliation to demographics of individuals in the country that have historically both been under assault. You know, and so we have those shared experiences. And it's a way for us to work together and say we understand dynamically what discrimination looks and feels like, and that we support one another, and that we're willing to stand together. And I'm a woman of deep faith, and I've always, just in times of pain and struggle, I've always believed that we've got to follow where our faith leads us, to stand up for one another. And I've been so proud and so grateful to work with the Jewish community in my own district, as I watched my parents work with the Jewish community as they were standing with us in Washington, fighting on our behalf those many years ago at the March on Washington. And I say it's our responsibility, particularly those of us in Washington that are operating on behalf of our constituents, is that, the 4 Bs, breaking down the barriers and building bridges. That's our responsibility. And I believe that this caucus is a wonderful way to be able to do that as we continue to just fight and stand side by side on these issues that so sorely impact every single one of us every single day. And it's really my hope that we're going to be able to continue to champion civil rights for all communities, not just for the minority, not just for the African-American community or the Jewish community, but every demographic of community in this country. We're here to do the work in Washington, and that should be our accountability as our Representative Lawrence said, is that, that is accountability for us. That is what we are doing in this caucus, is being accountable for breaking down those barriers. So I'm just really excited to be a part of it. And I feel like it's just a continuation of the work that my parents did.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Listening to you describe the passion behind your work really just always fills my heart, I have to tell you. It really does. And Mazel Tov, Colin. Again, really so happy and thrilled for you. The next question is, since the murder of George Floyd, which we're now coming up on almost the 1-year anniversary of, our country has mobilized in unprecedented ways, not seen since the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And I think we have a generation of Americans who read about those movements in their history books and now have watched history unfold before their very eyes. Really, for me, it shows the next generation of Americans what's possible when people come together and stand in the face of injustice in the United States of America. Last week, that really played out in Technicolor in the courtroom when the ex-police officer Derek Chauvin was found guilty on all 3 counts of murder charges that were brought against him. So can you share with us your reactions to the verdict and how you think the legacy of George Floyd has changed our country? And really, I think this is especially important for a Jewish organization that is committed to being an ally. How can the Jewish community be better allies in the fight for justice? What can we do at home in our own communities?
Lucy, since I went first last time, you want to go first this time?
Okay. Well, I have to honestly say, I will say I felt the same way that I felt even in my own case and trial when we did receive a guilty verdict for Jordan's murder and the attempted murders on the boys that were in the car with him. I felt a little bit of joy, but not completely, because as Brenda Lawrence has said, is that, accountability and that sense of justice has to be systemic. It has to be for every case that's tried at every moment, every time there's a tragedy like this. And so it's just really important to remember in these cases that no matter what the outcome is, there's nothing that can bring George Floyd back to his family. There's nothing that can bring my child back to us. So no system is truly, really just until everyone is treated equally in the eyes of the law. So yes, this is just the beginning. I'm so grateful that the George Floyd family is receiving that sense of justice. And I really believe this is sending a very strong, impactful message to America that, no longer are we going to stand by and just let people and communities of color continue to suffer under these really horrific tragedies over and over and over again. This is not just the urban community, this is happening all around the country, but we still have a very long way to go. And too often officers are still using excessive force, are not held accountable for their actions. And so it's unfortunate that, there's so often such a high degree of uncertainty when we are having these trials as to whether or not we're actually going to receive any justice. Yeah. And, and that tells you where we are as a nation. Are we going to get justice? Are they not going to get justice? And so this is why passing the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is so critically necessary. We know that some police around the country are doing really good work. Yes, we're not going to cast stones at all law enforcement around the country, and they do have the trust of their communities and, the people that they serve, and, and there's a good sense of trust and community between the relationships. But, this bill, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, it just really works to make sure that more of our police departments look like our best of police departments around the country. And so we've got to pass legislation that makes sure that there's safety in our neighborhoods by creating community programs that build that trust, that build that support, that gold standard training for our law enforcement, and, establish fact-based plans and that are designed to keep all families healthy and safe. And so, we're just going to have to continue to work as hard as we can to pass this legislation through the Senate. We've just got to also make sure that we're doing the same kind of work on the state and local level, at the grassroots level, holding accountability forums and spending time with our, local police precincts, holding town halls and, working with, community law enforcement. We've got to open up the dialogue and bring law enforcement and, all of the stakeholders to the table so that everyone is participating in what's most important to break down, as I said, break down those barriers and begin healing for everyone in our communities.
Yeah, well, Debbie, you mentioned, the previous, civil rights movements and, the level of activism that we saw, last year, last summer, and how that kind of rivaled that. And, the crown jewel of the civil rights movements or the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And because movements on their own the intention is to create change, and that change is only then solidified through legislation, and it can't just be on a case-by-case basis. And you see, I think Lucy's right, and I think in the Black community, a lot of us felt up until the last second, like even in this case, we weren't going to get justice, and that there would not be the right verdict delivered, because there's been so many times when there wasn't. And I think one of the things that I was really surprised by, impressed by, was the way other police came forward and testified in that case and said, this is not only not how we do things, this harms the institution of policing. We need more of that, because we want to support good officers. We want to support the folks who are doing that hard work. I'm very good friends with some of our officers here, both in Dallas and the Capitol Police, and know how on January 6th, I would not be speaking with y'all today if it weren't for their bravery. But in order to support them, when you're friends with someone, you can help them by putting in place the guardrails, the accountability factors that then help them be the best versions of themselves. And so, the George Floyd Policing Act, when we talk about what's in there, we're setting national standards, many of which, for example, in the Dallas Police Department, are already standards, banning chokeholds, trying to have de-escalation policies put in place and training put in place, funding for body cameras and the storage of body camera footage, and having standards around the release of that footage, but also creating a national registry of police officers who've had violent incidents, because it's often not the big police departments, the ones that are able to pay the best salaries and attract the best officers. If you lose your job somewhere, you can go somewhere else and become an officer there and continue that kind of negative cycle. And so having a national registry, impacts that. There are so many good things in the legislation, and I hope that we do reach a bipartisan deal on this, because I don't think it should be partisan. But I will say this, and Lucy knows this, in the last election, I think it was a real shame that this was used as a wedge issue to try and get votes, because there are Black lives, there are young people, different backgrounds across our country that have been lost unnecessarily, and that demand and us as legislators, us as members of the government, to try and find ways to make sure that doesn't happen. And so to politicize that the way it's been done, I think is a real shame. And I think that we have to push back against that. It's one of the things I appreciate what y'all do. And this should again be a solidarity issue. I mean, it's cliche to say it, but the presence of injustice anywhere is going to threaten all of our justice everywhere. And we all know that whenever you have anything like this happening in our country, we all know that means that there are other systemic issues that are going to be happening that allow for all of us to have our freedom, curtailed. And so this is not just about the African-American community. Of course, it is impacting us the most, and we need to have a response. But that's why I do appreciate the solidarity. I know that there are so many issues that in my community, our Jewish community really came forward strongly after the George Floyd murder and really wanted to be involved, but very active. And I really appreciate that, because it was also happening at the same time as a spate of anti-Semitic attacks and all kinds of dangers at our synagogues. And so I understood that they're juggling multiple balls, but still being interested in the right thing across the country. And so I just want to say thank you for the solidarity. Thank you for working with us on these issues. I think it'll make us a better country if we're able to do this. And it won't just help African Americans, it'll help us all.
Thank you so much to you both. And I know we're running long, but I'm going to just add two quick things. One is that liking and sharing on social media is not activism, and it's not being an ally. If that's all that you do, that's slacktivism. That might make you feel good, but it isn't actually participating in moving the needle on righting wrongs. So that's number one. So don't pat yourself on your back if that's all you do. And number two, we have to be part of creating uncomfortable conversations. If we all spend time only in our own bubble, and this is I say this to both the Black community and the Jewish community, we have to create our own uncomfortable conversations informally in parlor meetings. It doesn't have to be some formal event like what we're doing here on Zoom, but when we can all come together more safely again, I would invite Black and Jewish community leaders, but invite your Black and Jewish friends and neighbors over to your house and just start talking. Congressman Alcee Hastings, of blessed memory, he and I started a law enforcement community task force that we took to high schools and law enforcement all over our community. We did it for 4 years, and we hadn't even had a tense situation here that exploded into the public. We just knew that we had to start talking to each other so things didn't bust open like it had in other communities. And that created so much dialogue here that would never have happened if he and I didn't come together as a Black leader and a Jewish leader. We created some uncomfortable conversations, heard from kids in predominantly African-American high schools. They stood up in front of police chiefs all across our community, and they were heard. And that's the platform that Lucy, Colin, and I have, and Brenda as well. That's the platform that the Black Jewish Caucus will utilize. And we have to make sure that each of us as Jews takes personal responsibility to try to make a difference. Even if you're pushing that pebble a little bit up the mountain, just a little ways, that's activism. That's making a difference. Okay, off my soapbox. My next task, thank you to my colleagues for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Is to pass the baton. Thank you all so much. Pass the baton to JDCA board member Beth Kiefer-Leonard, and she will share her reflections and firsthand experiences of the past year, as well as last week's verdict. Thank you all so much for having me. Thank you to JDCA for existing and leading the way. Love you all.
Thank you so much. That the conversation really was inspiring and meaningful. It's hard to follow up with that, with the reality of what's been happening here. I thought long and hard about how and what to share today to communicate what it's really been like to live in Minnesota for the past year. And so where to begin? Because the insidious racial disparity that erupted here almost a year ago didn't start in the past year, in the past 5 years, or in the past decade. In our beloved Minnesota, always a top 10 place to live, always a top 10 place for education, and always a place too cold for any exodus from either coast, we denied the institutional racism that has lived just beneath the surface. How could it be possible that this place, home of endless bike paths and prints, 10,000 lakes, and the Mayo Clinic, ranked last in racial disparity metrics and educational outcomes in the city of Minneapolis, in Black home ownership, etc. For those of you who know our history, you also know that in the 50s, we lived in a community that was one of the most anti-Semitic in the country. We all wear so many hats in our lives, but my point of view is informed as a business leader who is headquartered in the city, as an activist in Minnesota, as an active member of the Jewish community, and most importantly, as a human being. The murder of George Floyd was here. It was right here, not somewhere else on CNN, not in someone else's community. It impacted everyone in some way, whether they knew George or his family, or whether they passed cup foods on their way to work, or their businesses were directly impacted by the aftermath. Our communal self-reflection only began with the murder of George Floyd, and it will continue for a long time, because as a community, we have to listen, talk less, and do more. I have seen expressions of community support in so many inspirational ways, from art and poetry to prayer, and to businesses stepping up in ways that would never have been possible in the past. One of the most directly impacted areas in our city was the Lake Street Corridor. It's a 5-mile that goes from Minneapolis to St. Paul. There's an association that was represented in this area. This association received donations in the past year that are 1,000 times its annual budget size. And it has assisted every single business impacted on that 5-mile corridor. Without this, the devastation would have continued each and every day instead of working towards healing. I've seen partnerships evolve between constituencies that never pass, their paths never cross each other, and conversations held, all socially distanced, of course, bringing people together that had never been in a room together, or on a Zoom together, should we say. It would be naive for me to say that if the verdict last week had not been guilty, our conversation today would be so much different, especially in the midst of this. Another murder took place here of Dante Wright. However, as the Congresswoman said earlier on this call, it isn't justice, it's accountability. And I truly believe that accountability is what our community needs today, tomorrow, and in the future. That is the only way we can measure if in Minnesota, if we are making a difference in improving this institutional racism. In my own world, we had to make decisions of whether or not we were going to board up our building. We sent people home. We sent people home on the day of the verdict. We saw our city consumed with Humvees and National Guard and guns on every corner trying to, I think, protect us. It was hard to determine which end was up at this point. I know that as the return to normal, and for here in Minnesota, spring comes and people go back outside, there will be hugs now, and there will be people listening to each other and conversations taking place on steps and in backyards and in places of worship, from the pulpits to everywhere else. And I think that that's the part of a community coming back to healing. But it is so important to understand that we had this right below the surface of everything that went on here. And we saw the numbers and we thought we were doing what was right. And now we know that we have to do it differently. And I think that the innovation in the different outcomes and the different methods of trying to make a difference will be what serves us best. So that's my few moments of sharing what it's been like to live here in the last year. As you know, one of the other things Minnesota has is giants in the Democratic Party. So back in the 50s, the man who was the mayor of Minneapolis by the name of Hubert Humphrey was the one who made a difference in leading the way towards making anti-Semitism some obsolete here in Minnesota, at least at the time. And my personal involvement with politics started with Vice President Walter Mondale, and I have to acknowledge his passing last week, Zichrono Livracha. He was a giant also who did what was right all the time. And I met him when Paul Wellstone died, and he decided to run for senator to help the Democratic Party and to make a difference. I'm also today proud to be represented by Congressman Phillips, who there's 3 things you need to know about him. 1, He won in a district that had for 50 years been Republican. He is the only member of Congress that takes no money from PACs, lobbyists, or other members. And lastly, I know that he has a great time at the state fair, which is the best place to be in the state of Minnesota the last week of August. So I am proud to be represented by him in our district. I am proud to have him here today. And Congressman Phillips, if you would just give us a few of your observations and sharing what it's been like to represent Minnesota in this past year.
Thank you, Beth, for your kind words, to JDCA for your wonderful work and for bringing us together. I just drove through North Minneapolis, which, as Beth just referenced, has been the longtime home of the Black community in Minneapolis, and before that, the Jewish community. I visited a charter school, drove down Plymouth Avenue, which in 1968, 67, after the riots, or during the riots, was the hotbed of conflict, not dissimilar from what we experienced here in Minneapolis just last summer. And 20 years ago, when I was a much younger man, I joined hands with a man named Harry Davis, who helped establish the Urban League here in Minneapolis, an extraordinary leader in the Black community. And I'm walking down Plymouth Avenue. We were looking at former synagogues that have now been converted to churches. And he turned to me and lamented, this is 20 years ago, lamented how this extraordinary bond between the Jewish and Black communities in Minneapolis had dissipated over the years, and how it was this hope and dream that we would reunite again, and reflected on the fact that he walked down that very street 40 years before at that time with my great-grandfather, Jay Phillips, having the same conversation. And here we are today. So much has changed, and yet so little has changed along with it. And as a community that suffered terrible anti-Semitism in Minneapolis in the 1940s and 50s, along with the Black community suffering from racism, we are communities that did something about it. We built a hospital, this is 60 years ago, with the support of Hubert Humphrey, back when Black physicians and Jewish physicians weren't afforded staff privileges at any hospital in Minneapolis. So the community got together and built one. Housing covenants and redlining segregated much of the community. And as I said, the community that was once the heart of the Jewish community is now the Black community. We are geographically connected, as well as through our values. And it brings me to today. You know, if not us, who? And if not now, when? You know, if any community in this country and the world can empathize, understand what injustice looks like, can understand fear, can understand persecution and discrimination, it surely is us in the Jewish community. And I want to find, in what has been one of the most heartbreaking years of our lifetimes, I want to find the silver lining. The silver lining is the inspiration to do something about it, not to be passive, not to retreat to our suburban enclaves, but to activate, to put ourselves in those very shoes in which our grandfathers and grandmothers, our foremothers and forefathers were in during our lifetimes. I've been thinking a lot about that lately, and not our opportunity, our responsibility, and I say that with intention, our responsibility to join hands and do so publicly, to be in the lead, not behind, and to be more than allies, to be leaders in the effort to ensure justice for all. Because if we do not have justice for all, we surely will not have peace for anybody. And those are my messages today, my friends. I am grateful, honored to serve in the People's House. Grateful to my friend Beth, who introduced me, and the community that has long supported me and raised me here in Minneapolis. And the community that raised me did so to activate during times like these. And in the face of injustice, inequity, and the opportunity to do something about it, I surely am grateful to all of you who, with your time, with your treasure, and most importantly, with your compassionate hearts, will help lead this effort to join with our brothers and sisters at a time where we need to. It will help our community, it will help the Black community, and most of all, it will help the human community. And that is the legacy I look forward to leaving with all of you. I wish you all Godspeed. I ask that you keep the faith, and I assure you that there's light at the end of the tunnel as long as we walk down that tunnel together. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your taking the time today, and we'll see you on the backside. I know you're.
Thanks, my friends.
Take care. I am going to turn it over to Bobby Saperstein, the JDCA Director of Programming and Strategy, for a few comments, and he'll wrap things up.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you to Representatives Wasserman-Schultz, Lawrence, McBath, Allred, Phillips, and of course, Rabbi Latz for being a part of today's really important discussion. And to all of you at home for tuning in and joining us as we say together and without equivocation that Black Lives Matter is a Jewish value. Our Jewish tradition teaches us that everyone is created in the divine image, B'Tselem Elokim, and that any loss of life is as if one has destroyed an entire world, Pikuach Nefesh. Today, we welcome, of course, the verdict last week as a first step in accountability on the road to justice. And at JDCA, we stand with the Black community as we fight for an end to all forms of bigotry and racism, be it supporting the George Floyd and Policing Act, passing HR1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, or many, many other injustices. You can learn more about how to take action with JDCA by visiting jewishgems.org. There, you'll also learn all about our many upcoming programs like this one, and about our JDCA membership program, how to join one of our 16 state chapters made up of thousands of dedicated grassroots volunteers, and opportunities to meet with your congressional representatives, many whom we saw today, to advocate for the issues Jewish Gems care most about during our week of action in June. As we end the week and prepare to enter Shabbat, I bring with me a profound sense of gratitude and hope. Gratitude for the space to learn from others and have conversations such as this one. And as imperfect as we are, so long as we continue to work towards a more perfect union, there's much to be hopeful about. I'd now like to welcome back Rabbi Latz, who will close today's program with some final words and a blessing from all of us here at JDCA. Thank you and Shabbat Shalom. Rabbi Latz.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you to the congressmen and women. Thank you to Haley and to Beth. My blessing for you tonight is simple. Each Shabbos, we have not one challah, but two. We have two because it's a reminder that on Shabbos we should focus on abundance, that we have enough, we are more than enough. As Jews, as Black people, it's our duty, it's our moral responsibility to build a world together where there are no more George Floyds that are murdered on our streets by our police, no more synagogues shot full of bullets, no children who go hungry, no one denied any opportunity because of their race or religion, their gender identity, their belief system, or who they are. So I wish us tonight abundance, that we have enough and that we are enough, that we work together so that everybody has more than enough. I pray for each of you that your Shabbos tables are sweet and peaceful, and that all of our neighbors in every neighborhood, in every city and town, every farm and village in this great nation of ours is able to sleep tonight and wake up tomorrow at peace. Shabbat Shalom.